Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
So this is the first time I think I can truly say in our noon book review, a man who needs no introduction, so I won't say anything else. So here's Ed Dague. He's got a new book out, and as the poster said, he has things to say. So here's Ed to tell us whatever he wants.
Thank you, Joe. Hi, all. So here I am in person to convince you I really do have legs. I mean, you could have watched for 40 years and not have known that. The book is 6 and 11, which were the two newscasts when I started to work. Those were the only two. Now, of course, there's even a 4 o'clock news that Lydia is doing on 10, and 5 and 5:30 newscasts as well. The reason for that is money. It turns out, far cheaper to produce a half-hour newscast than to buy any kind of rerun sitcom. When I first went to Channel 13 in 1984, they were paying me $85,000 a year. And at the time, the number one show on network television was The Cosby Show. And I heard a rumor one day from a provider of such things that when The Cosby Show went to syndication, that is in reruns that the stations could run in the afternoon or before news, it would sell for $85,000 a week. I found that incredible and impossible because I've just watched, my salary disappear into a week of a sitcom rerun. So I went upstairs and asked the general manager, Don Perry, is this true? And he did some work in his calculator and looked at me and said, to tell you the truth, Ed, if I could get it for $85,000 a week, I'd grab it in a second. So you get some idea of what it costs then for television programming. No way it costs $85,000 a week to produce another newscast. In fact, they found they had so much material coming in, they could simply tell the reporter, grab another soundbite from your piece, rehash it, and generate a minute story for the 5 o'clock news, and we'll put that on. So they hired one producer to basically write the script, didn't add a single reporter, didn't add a cameraman, added one producer, and added an entire new newscast. The reason that happened, one, is money. It's cheaper to produce news. But secondly, there's some real benefits to local news. First, you can't get it anywhere on cable. You have to go to 6, 10, 13, or 23 for local news. So that newscast at 5 o'clock is distinguished immediately because it's local news not available somewhere else on cable. The other amazing thing about news we found over the years is that you can come in at any point. And 5 o'clock is an hour where a lot of people are coming home from work. If you're coming in from work and you flip on the television and there's a mystery on, you can't really get involved. You've missed the beginning. You don't know who's dead. You don't know who the principals are. It's very hard to get involved in it to pick it up. News, you flip it on. It may be sports, which you don't care about, but in 5 minutes, the weather will be there and you do care. So it's very easy to come home and flip on the news. And ratings run in 15-minute segments, so if you watch it for 5 minutes, they got you. You count on the rating book, and they make profit. So that's why television news so expanded. It was greed, basically, and it watered down all of the newscasts. I have a whole chapter in my book. And let me preface that some by telling you why the book was written. The publisher called me up, actually it was Dan Lynch, and said, look, we have a wonderful idea. It turns out that journalism professors everywhere love to assign outside reading. Can you write us a book about how early television worked, and journalism professors across the country will assign it. It'll be extra reading, and we'll sell this book long after you're dead and buried. I said sure. I wasn't sure I could write a book, but I spent a lot of nights working through the night, typing, trying different chapters. First one I wrote was on Erastus Corning, and I sent that off to Dan, and he was my editor. And it came back and said, he said, you've described a person here, a reporter who had contact with Corning, as a gadfly reporter from Channel 10. And Dan, who of course was the managing editor of the Times-Union for years, knew who I was talking about, said to me, this is clearly Herb Starr. Why don't you name him? And I did. And that kind of changed the nature of the book some, because before then I wasn't going to name names. After that I started naming names. But I didn't slam anyone. And that's maybe one disappointment with the book. When Paul Grandal, who someone here has mentioned they encountered, when Paul introduced me or interviewed me, one of the things he said about the book, off the record, I mean, this isn't in the newspaper, is that he kind of expected there be more scandal in it. He said to me at one point, you must have known about women meeting anchors at the back door and things like that, and there's none of it in the book. Well, there isn't. So if you're looking for dirt on Liz Bishop or Ernie Tatro, it's not there. It's really about journalism. I'm told, though, that Ernie really doesn't like the book. Dick Wood told me. Dick loves the book. Dick has given 7 copies of my book to various people he knows in the business. He loves it. But Ernie doesn't, and I think the reason is I kind of explained in my last chapter, which is my favorite part of the book, why I wouldn't do commercials. And basically that's because I spent a career trying to establish credibility, which is all I had to make a living on. I mean, that's all a news person has. If you're not credible, if the audience doesn't view you as credible, you have no hope of succeeding. You're lost, you get off television, it's over. So I spent a career trying to maintain credibility. Why would I turn around and then use that to go out and sell cars for someone? It just seemed wrong. And kind of contrary to everything I had been doing for 40 years. So I wrote that in the last chapter, and I think Ernie got upset. I was amazed one day. I was giving the commencement address to Guilderland High School. I think this was '99, because Chris had just left us, and she had done it the year before. And I was telling them a story about Ernie Tatro, and all of the graduates laughed. And it dawned on me they had absolutely no knowledge of Ernie Tatro as an anchor. He was the Ford commercial guy, test driver Tatro. In their mind, that's all they knew. And they were laughing uproariously at the thought of test driver Tatro having been a news anchor, which kind of explained to me what Ernie had done to his reputation. I don't think that bothers Ernie. I know it doesn't bother Ernie. And I feel bad that he didn't like the book for that reason. Dick liked the book, and Dick does commercials, but he said in reading it, he kept grousing and mumbling, and he finally turned to his wife and said, he's right, isn't he? And his wife said, yes, he really is. Dick does like the book and keeps telling me, you don't understand me. And I've tried to explain to him, Dick, commercials were right for you, not for me. And he's a really nice guy, and he gives the book to everyone and does like it. So that's how people in the business react to the book. Part of what I wanted to talk to you today is about Occupy New York, Occupy Wall Street. Because one of the things I point out in the book is, and I have no solution for this, I have absolutely no suggestions. I don't know how to fund journalism. But I know that funding it for profit through the capitalist system creates distortions that are very difficult to get around, in effect impossible, because you're trying to attract an audience, and the way to attract an audience is to avoid things they dislike. Well, nobody wants to hear bad news. Nobody wants to hear news that conflicts with their basic conception of how things work, of what's right and what's wrong. Nobody wants to cooperate with news organizations or reporters who they think might embarrass them or their friends and relatives. So you have to recognize those 3 factors going into a mass media that's going to attract a mass audience. and understand the result of these pressures are going to be to try to maximize audience. And you do that, we recently see, by adjusting content. Fox News was the first that did that. They purposely set out to develop a different approach to news, a different basic philosophy viewing the news. They have put it on the air. It is unquestionably slanted. But so is MSNBC in the other direction, because Fox proved you can do it by going back to what journalism used to be, in effect. And a lot of Americans don't understand that. But the fact of the matter is, when the Founding Fathers wrote the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law, they weren't dealing with the kind of press we see. The whole idea of objectivity in journalism is new. It was a 20th century American invention. Didn't exist before then. If you remember your history about the Spanish-American War and Pulitzer and Hearst and the yellow journalism in New York City ginning up, let's go to war, let's go to war. That kind of stunned America afterward and helped journalists develop this notion, we're going to try to be objective. We're going to maintain objectivity and look at these things neutrally to the extent you can. You really can't, but you can certainly do your best. Before that, when the Founding Fathers were operating, there were no newspapers. They were dealing with broadsheets. And most of them, they were newspaper-like, but they were put out to establish a political position. They were put out by the parties, they were put out by candidates, they had definite political philosophies behind them. There was no objectivity. So that whole notion is kind of American and it's kind of new, and it may be disappearing, because there's no question in my mind that Fox deliberately set out to slant toward one direction, and MSNBC has gone in the other direction. They both have acquired sort of niche audiences, and they're both making money, and you can do that. Trouble is, it gets confused with objective journalism and becomes very hard to tell what's what anymore, especially when you have a slogan, fair and balanced, and you're trying to convince people you are. So journalism is extremely complicated, and when you try to do it for profit, when you're trying to attract an audience, there are distortions that are built in. One of the factors in all of journalism is who is in your audience, because advertisers don't care about most of the people in this room. They don't care about me. We're too old. And the thinking of advertisers is that your families, your kids have left home. You're no longer buying diapers. There's how much chance do they have of selling you diapers to anyone in this room, unless you're buying it for grandkids or something? You're not buying cars like you used to. There's no kids to buy cars. You're not buying clothes. You're just not spending the money you used to spend. You're saving it now for your retirement. You have to hold on to it. You're not consumers. We don't care about you. Go away. We really used to say that. When I first went to Channel 13, what I learned is all of this, and that it's all demographics. And what I learned was the expression that RGB skews old. What I found was that 13, who had a very small audience compared to RGB at 6 o'clock when I left, had 20% of the audience in this area at any time, 20% of the people who are still breathing, watching their news. By the way, Channel 13 is number one at 6 o'clock today with 7%. That's what's happened. The audience is gone for various reasons we can talk about, but the audience is largely gone. It's not the powerful medium it once was. Nonetheless, when they were looking for an audience, they were cared most about people 25 to 54. That's the age group they wanted. That's the age group the news was slanted to attract, and it was subtle. And I mentioned many of these things in the book, but for example, I was told by consultants, never refer to your Social Security check may be delayed this week. No. Your parents' Social Security check may be delayed this week. Word it that way, because you're not talking to older people who are on Social Security. You want the younger people who are worried about their parents, and that's how you write. Everything was written to attract young, don't attract old. You and I know that a car accident is not news. A single car accident just isn't news. Who cares? The person in the accident cares, and the police who covered it, and maybe a few people who were delayed by the accident in their daily travels. But it's basically not news. There's no fundamental public issue. There might be something to do with the safety of the roads, but it's just not news, nor is a house fire. But you cover those. It's called hard news in the business, and people are attracted to house fires. I don't know why, but they are, and it's the simplest thing in the world to cover a fire or an accident. Anybody can cover those. One of the things I point out in the book is to cover politics, to go into the capital of New York State and come out of it with a meaningful story takes a lot of brains, a lot of experience, a lot of perspective, the ability to see what's important and isolate it and build it into a story, and you don't find a lot of people capable of doing that. And the people who are capable of doing that, good writers, tend to be fairly expensive to hire. So TV stopped hiring them. Increasingly, you see very young people on television. They're actually so young, most of them don't yet have families. They're not trying to, and Ernie and I and Dick have talked about this. I'm not sure you can sustain a family any longer, as I did and Ernie did and Dick did, on the salaries paid in television, because the audience has gone to cable, to the internet. They've gone away from the news. The ratings are 7% versus 20, so it's roughly 1/3, and what they're getting is 1/3 the money they used to. So the pay has disappeared. You probably, if you read the papers, saw all the layoffs at all 3 of the stations, all major stations laid off, basically half their staff. They shed Lydia Kalbita, who was my last co-anchor, for whom I have enormous respect. She was the brightest, without question, of the applicants for that job, and that's why we chose her. She was so bright, unfortunately, she didn't appreciate the new management in the business. And I'll be very honest with you, because I have no reason not to be. When I read this week of Sinclair buying WRGB, I froze. They're the worst owners possible. They're horrible. They are very political. They are very conservative. They are famous across this country for dropping that conservative philosophy into their newscasts, into their documentaries. And I really fear for the friends I still have at RGB. I don't know how they're going to put up with that. Freedom sold it to Sinclair. Freedom wasn't the greatest owner, but at least they weren't overtly political in trying to manage the news, as Sinclair is famous for doing throughout the business. That's part of what drove Lydia out of 10, by the way, as well. The owners of, or out of 13, the owners of 13 now are a family based in Minneapolis. It's family owned. There's no board of directors. There's no outside shares in the company, so they can do whatever they want. They don't believe in global warming. And they tried to manage a series of stories to put their opinion of global warming most prominent in the story. Lydia objected. She wouldn't do it. She got in trouble. There was a debate for Congress. Lydia was one of those conducting the debate. The owners of 13 felt very strongly that there was a bill in Washington that would make unionization easier, the Chekhov bill. They wanted that defeated, and they gave her questions she was to ask in this debate. Lydia felt it wasn't an issue of any concern for people in general, not a big issue in a congressional race, not something on which anyone was going to make a decision. She felt their question was biased, and she refused to ask it, despite the news director in her ear in the control room screaming at her, asked this question. No. It's biased. It's an attempt by management to bias. I won't do it. The sort of position I never really had to maintain that strongly, because I never encountered an overt attempt to bias. Even when General Electric owned the station and was on strike, I never saw any interference. Never. Suddenly she saw it. And because she wouldn't say yes, when the time came for layoffs, despite the fact she was their biggest draw, They laid her off, and she's now at Channel 10 doing a 4 o'clock newscast, which is totally insane. And she knows it, but you want to put it on at 4 o'clock, fine. The whole idea is they don't want you to watch that. They don't. If you watch the 4, that's fine, go away if you want, because they still make the money. They've got the credit for you at 4 o'clock. You're not watching someone else. It's fine. And that was the whole concept. 13 doesn't care. They don't really expect you to sit down and watch the 5, the 5:30, the 6. No. Yeah, watch anyone, and they're fine. They've gotten the credit. They've made the money, and away they go. So it's an extremely money-oriented business. It can make a ton of money, or it could have. I mean, you saw $85,000 for a syndicated program in a week. Imagine what the commercials sell for, and if you can do that for a Cosby rerun in syndication, imagine what you can get for a fresh #1 newscast. When I left RGB, I didn't know any of this. I mean, I was really, frankly, naive about the whole business. I was a journalist. It was kind of head down. Do the journalism, do that. Didn't know anything. My lawyer went to see the GM of Channel 6, who said to him, I can't let Ed leave. I can't let it happen. He could take 3, maybe 4 rating points with him. That's over $1 million a year. It isn't going to happen. And my lawyer, Carl Langstrom, said, wait a minute. We've never heard this. 2 things. Ed will stay, and I'm negotiating his new contract. Delmonico didn't even smile, Carl told me. He called me up, the lawyer, from his car and said, is this true? I said, I don't think so. I think it's just hyperbole. But I called Don Perry at 13 and said, you know, we just heard this from Delmonico. Is this true? And Don said, oh, yeah. 1 rating point in this market currently is worth about $450,000 a year in income, in commercial revenue. So if you were to take 3, 4 rating points, yeah, we'd get $1 million a year right off the top. Phenomenal, the money involved here. And when you hear that, you start to understand what's at stake. For the owners, there's big money at stake, and they will do almost anything they can to boost their ratings. But the same is generally true of a newspaper. You also have to attract a volunteer audience. They've got to go buy the paper. And if it's full of bad news, how do you do that? I don't know. I mean, Fox, I think, is giving people what they want to hear. And never mind it's not true. Never mind, you know, that surveys have shown Fox viewers are the least well-informed when you ask them factual questions about the world and what's going on. And some of it, that whole philosophy may be in Herman Cain's, I don't need to know who's the leader of Stan. There's a view spreading in America. I talk about this in the book because I saw it. That's anti-intellectual, anti-science, anti-learning, and it's coming out of the conservative element in this country. It's one of the things that really terrifies me, and I am truly terrified. I will tell you flat out, and I point this out in the book, because of what has happened in news, there are things I could never say to you because you tune me off and go away. But I personally decided some time ago, maybe a decade, that this civilization is not sustainable. I happen to believe global warming is real and that it is anthropomorphic, that we are affecting global warming. I'm also aware, I was aware long before this week, that the 7 billionth person on this planet was about to be born. I'm aware of the shrinking amount of land we have to devote to agriculture. I'm certainly aware of the rapidly diminishing amount of protein in our oceans as we overfish virtually every population of fish that can exist. I don't know if you paid much attention to what happened in the Mediterranean, but the countries around the Med got together trying to protect the bluefin tuna. I don't eat sushi, but I guess bluefin tuna is the ultimate sushi. And the population in the Mediterranean is becoming extinct. And the countries got together trying to put some limit on the catch. They could not. It fell apart. Nothing was done. They're still fishing bluefin at will. out of the Mediterranean, and they will drive the animal extinct in that body of water. In fact, across all of our oceans, we have such a rising population of jellyfish. Can't eat them. We're not catching them. And they're getting out of control. They're also dangerous, you know, they sting, and they're not pleasant animals. But the population of that sort of sea creature is multiplying rapidly, whereas the fish we eat, the protein we need, is diminishing because we're overfishing the oceans. I don't think we can feed 7 billion. I don't think we're coming up on what is going to be a great shortage of raw materials. We're very near to peak oil. I don't know after peak oil what happens. I don't know how the economies function, but I can see a slowing of the economies, which is the last thing in the world needs at the moment. So I'm really scared about our future. I'm scared about my grandkids' future. I'm fine. Pull the plug. And my kids will probably be all right, but my grandkids, I don't know what kind of world they're going to live in 50 years. I don't know what's going to be happening with food shortages. I've cared about this kind of thing since I was very young. When I was a little boy, my father worked for Bethlehem Steel in Buffalo, and he was a manager. And he used to sneak me into the plant, which was kind of fun. He took me one day down by the big docks at Lake Erie, and I watched these enormous ore ships unload the ore coming into the Bethlehem plant. When we got home, I asked him, where does that come from, and how much is there? Because it was an enormous amount. And I got a lot from my father about you don't declare that you have iron on your property because it's taxed, so all kinds of people have it and won't declare it. There's probably more than we know. Don't worry about it. I started reading about that and found that there's so much iron on the earth. It's almost infinite. Don't worry about it. Nobody cared. Now, Google it. And you'll find that we now believe there are 56 years of iron ore left on the planet Earth for us to acquire and use. And that's it. 56 years worth at our current rate and increasing rate of usage. So we are depleting all kinds of raw materials. To my mind, that some of that is capitalism. I really wish we had imposed a tax on virgin materials some time ago, but that's policy, and I don't deal a whole lot with policy. I dealt with just facts to the extent I could, trying never to color anything. And let me go back to that because it's very important. People think newsmen want to bias news. No, that's the last thing I would ever want to do because all I have is my credibility to make money and keep you watching. To bias something would not be in my interest. It would be stupid. It's shooting myself in the foot. I would never consider doing it, nor would anyone I worked with, even if they wanted to and were inclined to. It's just not in their interest. So I never bought the whole idea of bias. I did sometimes understand why the press tended to be perhaps more liberal. And I believe the reason was that, and I will tell you this, as a reporter, you see a lot of seamy sides of life in general, but perhaps maybe politics in particular. And I came out of 40 years of covering politicians and news with very little respect for any politician. I was telling the publisher on the way over, sometimes I think there's something wrong with the personality type of anyone who would want to run for office. But I found all of them, after a while, become far more concerned about their safety and their job, even if they went in gung-ho to change policy to make it better for the public. Somehow that seems to disappear. And it just doesn't show up after 3 or 4 terms in office. And I had some very good friends before they were elected. I knew Jack McEnany for years before he ever thought of running for elective office, primarily because he was the guy who redistricted the county for Corning. And he was a friend of Corning, and I have a whole chapter on Erastus Corning. But Jack and I now talk sometimes, and I've talked to him about his triple dipping, and the answer I get is, I'm entitled to it. I earned it. True. By the letter of the law, true. But, geez, Jack, and I can't get anywhere. politicians in general become distorted by the power, distorted by the office, and distorted, I'm convinced, by the other politicians around them, by the culture that exists in the legislature, whichever one you go to, be it Congress or in Albany. After a while, the culture gets to them, and they become politicians, even though they went in with something else. So I'm concerned about us on all kinds of levels, and that's in the book, and a lot of concern about journalism, and then some funny stories. It's kind of a fun book. I didn't write it to be a heavy tome on capitalism. So there are some moments I discuss in the book. You know, if you're on television, it's really a serious affair. And if you're reading something about someone's dead and there's a funeral underway, the last thing you want to do is laugh while reading that, as you can understand. But there may be other things going on that make you laugh. And there's one famous night where I had to do a 9 o'clock update, you know, those 30-second things that appear between commercials. And Chris Kapostasi Jansing and I were talking, and we walked out of the newsroom. She came in the studio with me to continue the conversation. There was no prompter operator, so Chris said, "I'll run prompter for you, Ed." And I distinctly remember saying, "Have you ever done it?" And I definitely remember her answer as, "No, but how hard can it be?" Well, I was okay when the paper turned this way. I'm still reading it. Honest to God, it's moving up like this and it's twisting, and I'm still reading it. And then she picked up a wrench, and from the corner of the prompter, I heard bang, bang, and I just burst out laughing while reading a story about a rape on the Albany campus of SUNY, not when you want to laugh. And the callers came, and I tried to explain to them, I apologized on air and said, obviously I'm not laughing at the story, but something else, but there's a clock running, it's 30 seconds. It was awful. It's the kind of nightmarish thing you never want to have happen, and which jokers in the newsroom try to have happen. As I discuss in the book, there are all kinds of stories from the business about making people laugh. Scripts have been set on fire. And if you're reading something that's burning from the bottom, it gets a little tight. I preferred more thought, I would like to plant seeds of thought in the minds of my co-anchor and let them fructificate until he bursts out laughing. And my favorite example involved a thing we had on WRGB every Thursday night. Now look, there wasn't an hour, well, there was an hour of news in this area. There's 2 hours of news. If you will hire the staff, competent, intelligent people to get out into the community and cover things, you can fill 2 hours of nightly news with really interesting material, and it'll probably cost you $1,000 a day to produce it. So that's not what happens. What happens is, how many stories can you cover for me today? There was one day at RGB, and granted it was a summer day, but nonetheless, I covered 6 stories. I was their only reporter on that day because of vacations and sickness. 6 stories. How many do you think were covered well? I had to fill the hour, and I was it. I used to go into Channel 13 for months. I would get up early, go in, help assign the reporters, decide what we're going to cover, and then I'd go home, go back to sleep usually, which, by the way, I had great dreams when you go back to sleep, but I stopped. And I stopped because the day came, actually the weeks came, where I realized I'm getting up early, I'm schlepping in here down to the station so I can tell our one reporter what to cover. It's ridiculous. Generally, there's one story that has to be covered. So it's kind of a no-brainer. You know, if Herman Cain's holding a news conference in Albany at 9 o'clock this morning, we'll be there. See what he says today. I've never behaved inappropriately with anyone. Oh, I wish I could say that, but I'm telling you stories of my behaving inappropriately with Tetro. So we have this arts calendar to fill the hour. It's boring. It is so boring. It's just slides and Bill Fortune Snyder talking. And it got so bad that Mac, at the end of the set, every Thursday when the anchor started to read the lead, Mac would snore loudly, which could make you laugh. It became such a thing, the laughter during the lead to Art's Calendar, that Tetro finally turned to me on set this day in the first commercial break, having looked at the lineup for the show but not read the script. I've read the script. He says to me, shit, I got to read the Arts Calendar lead today. If I laugh, Decker will fire me. They'll fire me, Ed, if I laugh. You thought that story was funny yesterday. You read it and got through it. How'd you do that? I've read the lead. I know what's in the Arts Calendar. And I said to him, well, I thought of my car notes, my mortgage, my private school for my kid. I thought of all of the bills, all of the responsibilities I have, and I just read it. He says, uh-huh. I said, besides that, I was squeezing my left nut the entire time. He reacts the way you do. It's kind of minor, funny, and goes on. 40 minutes later, he turns the page to the Arts Calendar lead, looks at the camera, and says, in this week Arts Calendar, Bill Fortune reports the Nutcracker opens this week. Never got another word out. His chin started to vibrate. He put it down, trying to lock it so he wouldn't laugh. His head bent down, bounced off the desk, and I sat there, of course, completely innocent. He was so mad, he wouldn't talk to me the rest of the day. When I went in the next day, I said to him, because we used to sit facing each other, and we were really good friends. I said, you still mad at me? He says, oh, no, hell no. So did you get in trouble? He says, oh, yeah. He called me in and started to berate me, and I said, wait a minute, Don, let me tell you the story. And Tetro said, when I left, he was bent over laughing, and I just walked out of the office. So there's that kind of setup that can make you laugh. There are crazy things that happen in studio. I remember one amazing night, Mac finished sports. And the last story, I'm calling names out of an old memory, Martina Navratilova was being coached by Billie Jean King, okay? And Matt, that's the last story in sports, and it finishes. And we go to a break, and Matt says, off air now, just to us on set, those two have got to be lovers. And Chris says, no, they're not. And I said to Chris, how do you know? And she said, well, I'm really into tennis. I read all the magazines. I mean, if this was even rumored, it'd be in some of these scandal sheets. No, they're not. And Mac won't believe it. And he starts arguing. And this argument kind of mounts a little between Chris and Mac. And Mac finally proclaims, look, they're both homosexuals. They work together every single day. You know how those people are, those type of people are. They've got to be lovers. Chris says, Mac, you and I are heterosexuals. We work together every day. We're not lovers. And the commercial ends. At that instant, and Mac, unaware of this, screams on air, that's your loss. Nobody at home has a clue what that's about. But poor Chris has to read a fatal accident next. You know, it's just hopeless. What do you do? So laughter, a just inappropriate enemy all the time, and such things can happen. If I have any other stories that I can remember from the book, it's been a while since I wrote it now. It's almost a year. What other funny stories do I usually tell? I forget, and it's amazing because they're in the book, which is why I urge you to. The hockey game?
No. Tim Welsh and Tim Welsh, one of the other guys, were having a fight on what you were doing today.
Oh, yes. Yeah, it's not so much funny, it's true. And it's kind of unbelievable, but it's absolutely true. I swear to you, and you can talk to Welch, he'll admit it. Remember, there used to be news, sports, weather, and they flipped weather and sports. Well, that created some tension because weather is ad lib. There's no script. You can't really script it. So the poor guy doing weather is ad libbing, and there's a clock that he's got to meet. I mean, we give him an off time, and there's cues. I burst out laughing one day, by the way, thinking of time cues. 10, 9, 8. Well, up they come one day. I'm doing a tease. 10, 9, and he pulls it down and starts looking at it, trying to figure out how to do. And I just, what are you going to do? I mean, down it comes, and he's. The problem is, toward the end of the show, and I was producing these shows, you run out of options for time. I mean, Johnny Carson and the Tonight Show is coming at 11:30. Nothing you can do about it. He's coming, ready or not. So you got to get off then. So if Tim Welch goes long in weather, I got nothing left. It's going to have to come out of sports. That's all I can do. And Tim started to go long fairly regularly. And Yaffe Lombardo was doing sports. Yaffe, good guy, but maybe a little suspicious, that is to say paranoid. Yaffe decides that Tim is deliberately going late so as to short Yaffe on his time to give sports. And they start arguing about it on set. I'm sitting in the middle trying to do a newscast, and it gets louder and louder between words almost. Finally, the two of them get up. I'm closing out the show. That's the news tonight. Thanks for joining us. Johnny Carson, The Tonight Show is next. At the other end of the studio, I'm looking at Tim Welch and Yaffe Lombardo in a fist fight. Honest to God, they're pounding each other, and I'm smiling. It's the news, good night. I didn't laugh. There were other times when Tim made me laugh, but not that night. It's a strange, crazy business because it's not really pure journalism. It's show business from 6 to 6:30 and 11 to 11:30. But the rest of it is really pretty solid journalism. I mean, I got into TV news because I studied engineering and didn't think I could write. Was part of it. I knew I couldn't spell. So newspaper was kind of out of my reach, I thought. And television was far more effective, powerful. And so I started radio, but I really wanted television news. That was my goal, and I got there and found it to be as powerful and amazing as I thought, sort of. I also found journalism absolutely fascinating. And I tell you some stories about Erastus Corning. That was my first chapter, and I felt bad about this, but I did put it in the book. It is honorable, I think, what I did. It's a lie, sort of. I got word early in my career. I just started as news director of WOKO in Albany, which no longer exists. Alan Chartock bought it and put it on NPR. But I had gotten a tip from a very good source, I can't tell you who to this day, that 2 Albany cops had been arrested the previous night burglarizing a truck parked behind a warehouse in Albany. Big story in Albany. This is 1968. Corning is still in power. The machine is still in power with all of its power. And I called Erastus Corning to see if this was true. No point in calling the police. I learned that early. They're not going to tell you. And Corning's secretary blocked me, asked what I wanted. I told him. He came back, says, nope, mayor says he knows nothing about it, Ed. Never heard a thing about it. So I'm sitting in that little office thinking, I know this happened. How can I break this story? And my phone rang. It's Arnold Proskin, guy running for district attorney of Albany County. Hasn't got a prayer in hell of winning. We all know that because this is a Democratic town. But Arnie's calling a news conference for the following morning. I asked why and pushed them on why. Come on, give me a reason to cover because frankly, I think he knows about the police. He doesn't. He finally says, look, Ed, it's been 2 weeks since I held the news conference. It's time. I don't have anything specific, but I hope you'll come because I need my face back and my voice back on air. Then this idea, I hang up with Arnie, and this idea occurs to me. So I call Corning back, and I tell the secretary I want to talk to him about Proskin's plans for the future. Figure that'd get me through. And I said to him when he came on, I introduced myself as a reporter and said, I don't know for sure that Arnold Proskin knows about the police officers arrested, but it seems to me it's better for you if I break that on my little radio station tonight than if Arnie breaks it tomorrow morning at a big news conference. Corning said, I'll get right back to you. He didn't. The police chief called me, Edward McCardle, with names, badge numbers, charges, the whole McGill. And that's, frankly, I broke that story in WOKO and then called WRGB. Asked for the news director, gave him the story. It's a big story. He was certainly interested in it, but I had worked at Channel 10 as a technician and decided I didn't like their news operation, so I wanted to go to RGB, and that was the beginning of my campaign. Every story I broke on OKO because they're paying my salary and I owed them, and then I called Don Decker at Channel 6 to give him the story as well. So finally he was thinking of hiring someone. Here I am. I applied and got in, and that's the sort of thing you really have to do in broadcasting. It's such a difficult business to break into anyway. Frankly, if I hadn't gone to RPI and gotten a first-class radio telephone license, which allowed me to watch the transmitters, nobody would have hired me. I mean, I started as a nighttime announcer. They didn't care if I ever opened the mic and talked, I suspect. I was there to watch the transmitter and play records. And then PTR heard me and liked what I was doing all night on OKO and hired me away for more money. But then I'm doing rock and roll, which I didn't really like that much. So I turned it into kind of a political anti-war show. And we got big numbers. I mean, the colleges were alive with this show. And then Robert Kennedy gets shot in Los Angeles. And I heard the bulletin and decided I can't play Yummy, 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 I Got Love in My Tummy at this moment. So I stopped playing the music and went all news. And called the news director, who was Bob Lawson, and he called his staff, and they came in, and from 3 in the morning on, we were all news. I mean, this is the junior senator from New York, presidential candidate dying in Los Angeles. I'm going to cover that story. News director, or program director called about 4 o'clock and said, Ed, play the music. I said, no, Charlie, you're wrong. I can't play the music. This is too big. Senator Kennedy is going to die. This is a huge story. We got to stay on it. Ed, play the music. Charlie, no. Ed, you play the music or I'll come in and play the music. And I said, how soon can you be here? He came in, played the music. I was fired. Before he left town, 2 years later, he was going to San Diego. He called me up, which was nice of him, said, I just wanted to tell you something. You were right, I've decided. All those years ago, you were right, and we should have done news, and by the way, congratulations on having succeeded somewhere in news. It's a strange, crazy business because by disobeying orders that night, I got fired, but it really was the start of my career in journalism. Otherwise, I mean, I had wanted to switch to news, and the prior program director at PTR had said to me, no, I don't think you've got what it takes for news. You're going to be a failure as newsman. You're going to make too much money as a disc jockey. I'm not going to let you do it. When I asked later to Charlie, who had taken over from the fired program director, he said, no, I don't think you've got what it takes. So I couldn't switch to news there. So I got fired and wound up switching to news. I'm going to go to questions because I want to know what you want to know. And I've talked long enough. Please forgive the sweat. I take a lot of drugs, and they cause me to get hot and cold. And my wife is forever saying to me, aren't you going to wear a coat? And my answer is always, no, Donna, I got my drugs to keep me warm. I do, and that's all I think I really want to do about the book itself. There's a lot of fun in it. There's some personal stories in it. Some people are concerned about what I wrote about growing up. I intended to be honest. It's part of what I am. I came from a difficult home. There were a lot of physical violence in the house I came out of. Most of it was domestic. It probably distorted my view on all kinds of things, certainly made me insecure in my early years. I also was facing an absolute mandate that you will study engineering, nothing else. It's engineering or I won't pay for college. So and it's funny, I applied to RPI, which my father, who was an engineer himself, and as I mentioned, a big honcho with Bethlehem Steel, had never heard of RPI. RPI is really, it's a very good school, but they're producing scientists who should be doing research or very high-level things. I mean, designing space shots and all. It's not just a routine engineering school. But he had never heard of it, so he invited this guy over to the house to talk me out of it. And I still remember this guy sitting in our living room in Orchard Park, and my father telling him, my son wants to go to this Boondock College. What's the name of that place you want to go? And this guy's taking a drink. He had owned a consulting firm in Buffalo that hired engineers. I said, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. And he went, Jim, that's about the best school in the country. And that ended my father's concern about RPI. I shouldn't have gone. I mean, I hated it. I hated engineering. At my senior year, I remember sitting at the kitchen table trying to work senior year and simply putting the pencil down and saying to myself, I am so sick of numbers. And this was before calculators, so all addition and subtraction had to be done. And I got so sick of doing math, I said, I can't do this for my whole life. I just can't. So I quit. Well, I told my father I was going to quit, or that I was going to finish, but probably wasn't going to work as an engineer. And he said that I'm not paying anymore, and that ended my college. So from there on in, I was kind of drifting alone and drifted into a business I wound up loving, that I felt was important, and at which I had some success. I wouldn't, as I told the Guilderland graduates that year, I would never be here speaking to you had I stayed an engineer. So my message to kids, by the way, and I'll give it to you too, although none of us are going to graduate anymore now. But my message to all high school graduates was hated by parents, I guess, because it was, don't listen to your parents. Don't listen to your teachers about what you're going to do in life. Only you can know. Do something that interests you. If you enjoy it, if it interests you, it'll be a great career and you'll be a success at it. If you're doing something you don't like, just doing it to make money, you're going to hate it. You're going to hate life. You're going to be old and miserable. The key to things is figure out what you want to do. Don't listen to anybody. Kids loved it. Parents, it's funny. I gave that speech first time in Catskill, and I was met with dead silence. And I said to my friend Alan Chartock one day, Alan and I, by the way, were great friends. What you saw in there was all game. Alan and I were best friends, but I was in a position where I had to argue with him every night, but we got along. And Alan said to me, I don't give high school speeches anymore, Ed. I gave one in Catskill, and it was such a bomb. And I said, yeah, I don't believe it. So did I. And I almost quit, too. And I walk across the airport, and this woman stops me saying she was a teacher at Catskill High, and she just finally encountered me and wanted to tell me what a marvelous graduation speech you gave. So I resumed giving graduation speeches. But that was my message. Do what interests you, and you can't possibly lose in life. Do what you hate just for money. It's not worth it. Who's got a question? Weekends are a strange thing. People don't watch. It's amazing. The numbers Monday through Friday are up here, and the weekend numbers are down there. And it's distractions. I know and I understand, but the weekend anchor is never paid very much. It's not a business of love. It's a very cruel, tough, be good today or be gone. And the saying in the business is, what did you do for me today? Nobody cares about last month's ratings. What are this month's? And falter and you're gone. And they fire people like crazy. There is no security at all, which unnerves a lot of people. And I mention in the book, and give you some reason to believe it, I think, that RGB management used that strategically. They kept Ernie so insecure that he told me, long after I had gone to 13, called me up one day, we were talking, and he said, Ed, I was so insecure when they called me down to Delmonico's office, because your numbers were going up, and they wanted me back on the 11, is what they wanted Ernie to go co-anchor with Liz. So they called him down to the GM's office. Ernie told me he was so sure they were going to fire him that day that when they told him they wanted him to go back and do the 11, he was so shook he didn't even ask for a raise for doing the extra show. He forgot. He was that unnerved by, and I said, Ernie, it's amazing because they needed you far more than you needed them. And he had no concept. And that was kind of deliberate. I felt so bad for Ernie the whole time because he felt so insecure. He wouldn't ever confront management. And you got to. But that shortened my tenure. I mean, it's in the book. I was union president. And if you ever want to leave broadcasting quickly, become union president. They had no sense of humor. Yes.
I've got a question, Ed, about names, okay? In recent years, I've met a few people. One was a guy named Dick Woods, whose real name is Dick Woodward.
Woodward, yeah.
Okay, and then another guy I met, his name was Doug Myers. His real name is Horstmeyer.
Right.
What's your real name?
Dague. Oh, really? But I'll give you a funny story about that. Doug Myers called me up one day when he was at 10 and I was at 6. And he had just gone down the DMV to renew his license. And the clerk said to him, I didn't know you people on television use false names. And Doug said, yeah, most of us, because you don't want to be bothered at home, so a lot of us changed the names. And the clerk said, well, that's amazing. I can't wait to tell everybody that Ed Dague is really Doug Horstmeyers. When Chris was going to MSNBC, we went out to lunch, and she said, I don't have time to think about this. I'm putting you in charge. What name should I use? Kapistashi or my married name? And I thought about it all night, and we met the next day, and she said, well? And I said, well, you tell me your brother pronounces it Kapostasy. And she says, true, because it sounds like apostrophe, he's a teacher, and the kids get it quicker. And I said, yeah, but what are you going to say the first night when Tom Brokaw says, Chris Kapostasy brings the... She said, right, it's Jansen. And that's how we made the decision. Chris is one of my best friends on earth. I mean, I think Chris was the best possible co-anchor. She was terrific. We did it 11 years, which is unheard of. I mean, local anchors just don't stay, period, that long. And for a co-anchor team to exist for 11 years was just phenomenal. And we still talk, and I don't envy her life at all, frankly. And it's interesting, I don't get into this in the book, but she and I have talked about it. It's such a profoundly different life. Chris is now traveling the world, highly recognized as a journalist, gets a lot of big stories. I mean, I wrote her when she was in Iceland saying, my God, my choice would not have been to pull the reporter out of LA to go to Iceland. There may be somebody a little closer like in Europe, but she does that. She loves it. I couldn't have done it. Some of that's in the book. I once had an offer to go to London. I once had an offer from NBC to go to any market I wanted, and I didn't want any in the United States. I would have gone to London. I would have gone to Paris, which were the two they dangled in front of me. By the way, because at the time, those were the only two cities they would send any married correspondent. And the guy who was the NBC talent scout told me, network doesn't give a damn about marriages, Ed. We're simply losing too much money flying our correspondents overseas, every one of whom has gotten a divorce back for hearings in child custody, alimony hearings, the whole thing flying back and forth. We think the only place we can send married people now is London or Paris, where we have bureaus. By the way, he told me the London Bureau, which is what he was talking to me about, was responsible for all of the British Isles and all of Africa, with the exception of the Middle East. When we cover the capital, I hope you buy the book, it's in there. Because, and I explain this in some depth, and I already have told you, it takes brains to cover the Capitol. That's a hard building to walk into. Most young reporters out of school cannot do it. I mean, I couldn't do it when I was young. I was intimidated. I got into the elevator, and Nelson Rockefeller stepped in with me. I could barely talk. much less I was scared to death. This is the governor. 2 years later, I was arguing with him at a news conference, and my knees were shaking. It was about Schenectady OTB. But you're intimidated at first. You've got to mature. You've got to know what you're doing. You've got to have some experience to cover stuff like that. And even then, it's expensive and slow. And that's not what they want. They want fires and accidents. They're cheap, quick, cover them, put it up for 30 seconds. The audience will drool over it, and you don't have to do anything serious or meaningful. And frankly, that's the attitude. And it was the whole time I was there. And I know I wrote a blog about this for some time, and people used to respond, yeah, you're another one of those. You get out of the business, and now you say all this stuff. Why didn't you say it while you were in the business? Well, dummy, because I wouldn't have been. I'd have been fired instantly. Are you kidding me? But now I can say it. It was always that way. It still is. They're doing it on the cheap. They don't care about content. They care about ratings. And so you get people in the business who care because they're built that way. They're built to like news and to care about it and care what's going on in society. That was me. And I really cared, and I still do. But if you don't get in the business, because you're going to hate it. And even if you do, you're going to be frustrated at not being able to cover what you want in the depths you want. But you're doing some good, some little bit of good, and that's all you can handle. Thank you all very much. I'll stay around.